problem is they are redoing the hotel, and so they moved the restaurant to the back of the resort. Wound up taking us a little bit longer.
It was a bit of a hike.
It was.
It's a little warm out. I don't know if you've noticed out here, but you know, Connecticut, we think it's warm when, you know, everyone back home was complaining it was like 85 degrees, and I'm like, no, you're all right. You'll be all right.
But you decided to set this new book, Cocoa Beach, though, further south, as in Florida, right?
Yes.
It's got a really beach cover, doesn't it? With
Well,
the
I
ocean
think they were really going for that. So we had, because it was Florida, we were able to say, yes, we need a Florida cover, which is really sort of a beachy, tropical cover. So, in fact, so my book that was out last winter, The Wicked City, I actually wrote that after I wrote Cocoa Beach. I wrote Cocoa Beach first. And so I came to write The Wicked City, and then we said, actually, Cocoa Beach makes a better summer book, and The Wicked City makes a better winter book. So, sure enough, you know, when the cover comes out, it's very Florida, it's very beachy. So I guess we made the right move there.
They probably did, but in a sense, it really isn't what the book is about, because this is very much a kind of Rebecca story, and lots of it ties back to England, specifically Cornwall.
Well, it does, and you know, I actually got the idea for the book when I was traveling in Florida. I had, just because of scheduling, so I think I was on a book tour in Florida, and then followed quickly by a spring break trip. I have 4 kids and a husband, and we took the minivan all the way down from Connecticut to Miami, Florida. And so I had a lot of Florida experience over a short period of time, and I happened to be reading a book at the time that it was about the 1920s, and it had a chapter about Florida in the 1920s and what a, you know, boom town all of Florida was. So I was getting these Gothic vibes. You know, you're there, and I had been to Florida a few times, but you know, you forget it's a big state, and we think of the developed areas, we think of these sort of beachy areas with all the condos, but in fact, so much of Florida is this kind of wilderness, and it's, you know, it's a tropic wilderness. And so I was getting this sense of very sort of, it was like a tropical Cornwall. It was literally the thought in my head that, gosh, you know, you could really hide a lot of dead bodies around here, which is how writers think. And so I thought it would be so interesting, and I have this book in my hand, and I'm looking around the landscape, and I literally thought this would be, and the 1920s itself being a period of great change, and things being very uncertain, and the ground being unsteady under your feet, which is the feature of a Gothic novel, really, is that you have this person who is essentially dropped into an unfamiliar environment and has to figure out what the rules are, has to figure out who to trust.
Well, not just that, but most Gothics are enclosed by an estate or a house.
Yes.
So you have got, in fact, that going on here, because your widow, with her child, arrives at this Florida mansion. And there were a lot of them then, because there was a lot of big money that went down.
Oh yes,
you know,
a lot of development going on
right
in Florida at the time.
And so there it is, and well, you tell it, it's sort of like Manderley after the fire.
It is a little bit. So it's actually told in 2 narratives. So there's a narrative that takes place during the First World War, and then later in 1922. So she goes to France, escaping this very claustrophobic childhood. They've basically been living in hiding because her father is suspected of this terrible crime. So she essentially leaves for France as kind of an escape. I mean, honestly, the Western Front for her is a more attractive proposition than continuing to live at home. So she goes there, and she meets this British Army surgeon, and she falls in love with him. But we know that something goes wrong in that relationship, because in 1922, she turns up in Florida. She's received a telegram that her now estranged husband has died in a fire, and she's got this 2-year-old daughter. So she's come down to figure out what happened to him, and had she been unjust in leaving him? Was it really so terrible? Had she misjudged him? And then, of course, she starts to wonder, wait a minute, you know, these clues start to pile up. Did he really die in this fire after all?
Ooh, well, so maybe she's not up enough. But there's a lot of backstory about his family and
Yes.
his history and the war. So it's a complicated novel, but it's we don't think of Florida, I think, looking at it today, as the kind of place it was back in the 20s when it was ripe for developers and, you know, people hadn't put railroads in yet. What was the whole Henry Flagler thing? Wasn't that in this period?
So yeah, you had the trains going down, and you
Right.
had the Dixie Highway. They had
Right.
sort of that was now paved. You could get down. But I mean, the real, you have Carl Fisher, who comes into Miami Beach, and he's the one who makes Miami Beach, and that whole area. He spends all his money developing this, and then you have Coral Gables, you have developments like that. So you have all these, big name promoters putting brochures out, magazine advertisements, everybody in the Northeast and in all over the country actually being told, well, Florida's this paradise, you need to buy your place in paradise. So they came down by the train loads, and in fact, I mean, it was such a fevered atmosphere. You could actually buy your property in Florida. You could buy a title deed to a Florida piece of land. You didn't know actually where it was or what it was really worth, but you could buy it. There were people, hawking them in the aisles on the
My
trains.
grandmother actually bought 5 acres in an orange grove. I still remember that. I had no idea where it was or what it was worth or anything, but it was a kind of land rush.
It really was.
And it was also, for people who lived in the Northeast, it was a winter playground. I mean, this was the place. Interestingly enough, when we were talking to Linda Castillo on Sunday, we were all reminded that there's an Amish enclave. That, the Amish from Ohio went down to the Gulf, area, and had their own community and so forth, but they too wanted to escape the Ohio winter, but they wanted to go where there were just other Amish, because they lived under that rule.
Yeah.
And all. So there were a lot of different groups attracted to.
Well, and that's part of what's so
Florida.
fascinating. You have such a mix of people, and of course you got Prohibition.
Right.
So Prohibition comes in, and it's the amendment is ratified in 1919. The Volstead Act is passed. That comes into effect in January of 1920. And from that moment on, the object of every American was, how to get around Prohibition. And human ingenuity was never put to such a great test as in that decade. You had all the booze coming down over the Canadian border, and you had the bootleggers, and you had all the exceptions in the Volstead Act. I mean, you could get a prescription for alcohol for medicinal purposes, as many did. Churchill, when he came over to visit New York, the first thing he did was get a doctor's prescription for, I think, like a 5th of scotch a day or something like that. So, the doctors were making money. That was when all the drugstore chains actually.
But that's what actually led organized crime
Oh,
really get
yes.
going in the United States.
People made a lot of money getting around Prohibition, but the big thing, of course, was Rum Row, which, I had never actually heard about. But Rum Row, until I started sort of doing all this research, Rum Row, because of course you had U.S. territorial waters extending out. I think initially it was 3 miles, and then they extended it to 12 miles because 3 miles was not working so well. So they extended it to 12 miles. But you basically had this line of ships that was moored just outside U.S. jurisdiction, and it was floating warehouses. So they would get supplied by all the the suppliers coming in from all over the place, the Bahamas and from Europe, from the Scottish distillers, would just sort of supply into these ships, and then they would, the local rum runners would go out to Rum Row, get their supply and come in. And of course, Florida, being undeveloped at the time, having this enormous long coastline and proximity to places like the Bahamas, was an obvious place for rum runners to set up shop. So you had this just complete mix of lawbreakers, and the 20s was a time when suddenly lawbreaking was okay because it was considered to be an unjust law, and this is kind of a new thing for us as Americans, and it's one of the things that made it such an unsettling decade. The fact that it was okay, socially acceptable to break the law.
which we're now going through with legalized marijuana, you know, in some states and not in others, and it's creating, and it also has created, it was pointed out, wasn't Don Winslow, but somebody else, the unintended consequence of legalizing marijuana is that the cartels stopped growing marijuana and beefed up heroin. And so the heroin trade has gone way up because the money in marijuana, now that it's legal in some states, went way down. And that's really what happened in Prohibition, is that, you know, whatever price alcohol was went sky high, you know, under those conditions.
Well, and it really fell hardest on the poor and on ethnic minorities. I mean, if you think of, you know, the flood of immigration that came in through Ellis Island and so many of these countries, I mean, alcohol was just a part of the fabric of life. I mean, drinking wine with your meal, drinking beer with your meal, going to the saloon, the local saloon, which was sort of like the general store in a lot of ways. I mean, they provided a lot of services for immigrants, and all of a sudden those are shut down. It's really falling very hard on immigrant communities because it's not actually illegal to drink alcohol. It is illegal to sell it and transport it and manufacture it with obviously the exceptions we've talked about. So, you know, the rich guy going out to the speakeasy with his girl and drinking a bunch of drink, he's not actually going to get in very much trouble. It's the owners of the speakeasy, it's the guys who are distributing, who, by the way, this was a great way to make money if you were you know, if you were working class, if you were, you know, on the margins, this was a great way to make money. So they did, but they stood at enormous risk of real jail time. So there was a sense that this was unjust, not just because the government is telling you what you can and cannot drink, but also because the people who are paying the penalty are the ones who can least afford it.
Yeah, well, it led to sort of an outlaw culture. When Stephen Hunter was here in June 1934, was the year of all the bank robberies. It was when you had Dillinger and you had all these guys and all, and that whole outlaw thing kind of peaked at the end because that prohibition was repealed, you know, in 33
Suddenly
and
they
34.
needed a new business.
Well, but you know, it was a whole era of outlawry, really, as a consequence of a law that people didn't want to observe, and really led to the formation of the FBI and all kinds of, you know, things. I always find unintended consequences to be fascinating. You know, you do social engineering thinking you're going to achieve X, and then you wind up
with a new problem.
with Y.
That
you
you
know,
have to socially
that
engineer.
you hadn't really planned on. But that's really not the point of your book. The point of your book is that I'm sorry, I'm going blank on her name.
Oh, Virginia.
Virginia
Yes.
arrives, so we meet her
Yes.
as she
As she-
arrives
pretty
at the
much
estate.
just as she arrives at, and there's two houses. There's the house that he's got on the beach, and then this plantation inland. And there's actually a great story because I knew I was going to have this inland plantation because Simon is a gardener, and he's inherited this old plantation that has been in the family because one of his ancestors married an American woman. So there's all these sort of orchards that have fallen into disrepair, and his idea is that he's going to bring these orchards back into production. There's this great demand now in Europe. He's going to be able to export all these fruits to these, you know, the people who are desperate to have fresh exotic food on their table. So I'm getting ready at one point to move the action to a plantation inland. And I just wasn't sure where it was going to be, and it was, you know, when you're not quite sure about a chapter, it's hard to get it started. And at the time, my in-laws were downsizing, and I walk into my mother-in-law's kitchen, and she's got all her letters laid out on the table, all these old letters she's sorting through. So I pick one of them up, swear to God, completely at random, and I look at it, and you know how they always put the date and the place back then, and this letter is dated from, I think, 1936, and it's you know, the place mark is Maitland. And I said, "What's Maitland?" And she said, "Oh, that was the plantation in Florida that was in the family until we sold it in the 1950s." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you know, I mean, talk about a sign." You know, I think writers were kind of a superstitious bunch. So when you get a sign like that, you're like, "Okay, I think I'm on the right track now." But so I knew that so I named the plantation Maitland just for that reason. And if you look on a map or the Orlando area, you know, there's an area called Maitland, and that was I guess my husband's family's plantation. So I kind of knew I was on the right track, and I felt a great kinship at this point with, you know, with the geographic location, which is always a great thing. But, you know, one of the reasons that I sort of chose this very sort of Gothic setting and these Gothic elements into the story was just because, you know, I was so fascinated with the 1920s, and it was such a unique period. And again, you know, it's this period that seems ripe for a Gothic treatment. Everything is so uncertain. Everything is falling apart. All these institutions that we had placed such faith in are crumbling, partly as a result of the war, which of course was this tremendous catastrophe for Western civilization, but also all the technological change and scientific advancement and art and literature. I mean, everything, fashion, everything is changing in this, you know, almost sort of whiplash way. And if you're living through this, you're disoriented and you're disillusioned, and it's all these things that sort of make up the fabric of your classic Gothic novel. So I was trying to sort of use this as a way for describing the changes that we went through as a society, as a civilization, as this decade progressed.
Well, there's also, because it's such a hot genre at the moment, there is an element of trust no one in any Gothic. You're not sure who is telling you the truth, who's a reliable narrator in the Gothic. Remember, you read all the way through Rebecca and you never actually meet Rebecca. You never hear from Rebecca. And so the only way you can know her is what people have to say about her, and which of them can be relied on to be giving you any accurate picture of her, because everybody had a different reaction to her and so forth. So when she arrives at this place and her husband Simon may be dead and so forth, you know, you the reader don't get to meet Simon, so all you get to find out about him at the outset is what people are saying about him.
His brother and sister are there.
Right.
They have moved over to Florida to help him recover this family fortune. So, you know, Virginia's basically given a home with them. These are the people that, you know, have sort of taken her in and are helping her to heal from her grief, essentially. You know, that he's still the father of her child, and she loved him once, and, you know, she's still reeling from all, you know, it actually follows, it's not a sequel to A Certain Age, because Virginia is very much a minor character in my previous book, A Certain Age, but there's this big denouement at the end of that book, which Virginia plays a small part, and so she's sort of reeling from this, she's reeling from the news about Simon, so she's very unsettled at this point. She's been through a lot of psychological trauma. And of course, psychology is also a big theme in the book, because everybody's traumatized in the 1920s. They've just been through this war where even if you weren't actively participating, which, you know, they didn't have a name for people, well, they did, shell shock, but I mean, PTSD was, I mean, something that pretty much everyone was experiencing at that point. You might just say that the 20s was just a PTSD decade. And so I wanted to incorporate that element of psychology in there because, of course, you have Freud, and his ideas are gaining currency, and in the absence of faith in sort of the traditional social institutions of religion and sort of respecting your elders, which also went out the window in the 1920s. You know, you have this newfound faith in science, and so Freud's ideas get enormous currency. Everyone wants to be analyzed. You think, well, if I can just sort my brain out from some professional, then I'll be okay. So I wanted to incorporate that. So there is what we would call a psychopath in this book, and our job, and Virginia's job, is to figure out who that person is. Who's the one you can trust, and who's the one who's there to use you.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember Mary Stuart? Any of you read Mary Stuart's books? Remember, there are always two guys, and you were never sure
which brother
one.
scenario, exactly.
Right, you know, but I mean, no, it was always interesting because you went all the way to the end, and you were never entirely sure which of the two potential, you know, suitors was going to turn out to be the okay guy. And even the crocodile and the sandbank, Elizabeth Peters' book, you know, you don't know if you can trust Emerson. you just don't know, you know, all the way through it, which is why you have to read that book first to find out who he is. If you read any Amelia Peabody book after The Crocodile and the Sandbank, you will ruin The Crocodile and the Sandbank for yourself forever. You know, you just can't get over it. And I think that's an important part, you know, when you think about Mrs. De Winter trying to sort out who was telling her the truth.
Who was telling her the truth?
You know, was Rebecca murdered? Was she even still alive? You know, did Mr. De Winter kill her? You know, on and on.
And nobody is actually telling
Max,
her the truth.
that was his
Yeah,
name,
there's
Max.
everybody's hiding something. So, you know, she's the one, she's sort of left to her own devices to figure this out on her own. And, you know, I think, particularly in the context of the 20s, that's something that's kind of important because it is a decade where women, for maybe the first time, are allowed and sometimes even encouraged to be on their own. And sometimes it's not even their choice because so many men have died in the war. They're left to sort things out on their own.
More so in Europe, I think, than in America. But still, there were an awful lot of war widows. And also, there was you couldn't really verify things easily. There was no internet. There was no... I remember editing a book by Vicki Delaney, which I absolutely loved. She's over there somewhere, about a World War II bride, who married a Canadian and came back to Canada and began to think that maybe her father-in-law was a serial killer. But she couldn't stay in contact with her family. Phone calls were too expensive. Travel was, you know, not on the, and letters took forever. And so we're not that far away from 1946, but this woman was really isolated. And now, you know, we run around the world with our cell phones and we can text from remotest Peru and
But just think of your panic when you lose your cell phone and you've literally lost your mooring in the world. And it's amazing how quickly we've come to depend on this.
Absolutely.
And you know, I think, you know, when you think of the Gothic story, I mean, it really plays on some of our very deepest fears as human beings. I mean, to be isolated without your kin group is the most vulnerable position a human being can find themselves in.
Isolation in general is a part, and that's why they're often set in like a remote estate or a big spooky house or whatever, you know, because I mean, it's an Agatha Christie concept in its own way, but you really do have to put people in a place where they have to try to figure out who they can trust and rely on themselves because they're isolated from the normal, you know, information channels and so forth. And so when she arrives and the house is burned down and the Simon is gone and, you know, she doesn't know his relatives all that well.
And she's got a child to look after as well.
It's a very dangerous position, and you know, to then decide how much you can trust yourself to figure it out, that takes a lot of courage, you know, to do that.
And she's somebody who has been sheltered. I mean, they've lived this life where they have been hiding essentially from discovery. So she's got a kind of a curious mixture. She's a bit naive because she hasn't had much experience in the world, and yet she has these suspicions and this sort of sense of something bad looming on the horizon, just based on her whole childhood experience. But it's interesting how, and this is why that story, that kind of story, is so fascinating. You know, as something like Rebecca, we think of this young woman who is essentially, you know, powerless, without friends, and she grows during the book and finds enormous strength. So to sort of be, by being put to the test in this situation, that we find our strength and we learn to survive because we have to.
Well, she does, but she never actually even gains a name. She's Mrs. De Winter all the way through that book, you know, which is, I think, fascinating. I've always loved Gothic novels. I mean, there was a huge, in the time of Jane Austen, and she refers to it, I think, in one of her books, or if you read Georges Harris' books, it's called The Monk by you know, William Lewis.
I read a few.
Terrible book.
And
Oh my God, it's just such a potboiler. And Mrs. Radcliffe sort of wrote them
the Castle
too.
of Otranto.
Right,
yes.
exactly. But
I had to read though, after I read Northanger Abbey, I had to go back and read a couple of those so I could understand all the jokes that were in the laundry list, and
That's right. No,
mysteriously
Northanger Abbey is
laundry
a
list.
sort of sanitized version.
Exactly. Well, it was Jane, making fun of all this, and everybody,
was, yeah.
getting worked up over it.
But people really liked being scared, and of course, the first novel in English was written in 1747 or 49, so the novel's a really new form.
It is not.
It is not, and it's got, it isn't trammeled yet by, tradition or whatever it is. The first novel, which is called Pamela by Richards, although some people think it might be Robinson Crusoe or whatever, was an epistolary novel. And, because they hadn't solved the whole problem of voice and narrative flow and the whole bit. So it was all very experimental. And today, you have guys like Stephen King are still writing a version of, The Monk, Mrs. Ray.
Exactly. Well, because like I said, I was an anthropology major in college, which people sort of expect you to have majored in English or at least history, since I write historical fiction. But I just find that anthropology gives you so many insights into this whole, I always want to call it the science of storytelling, because we are, human beings. It's what we do. It is how we communicate our fears, our culture, our values, what you might call the heroic virtues. What do you do when you're placed in an impossible situation? What is the right thing to do? How do you do it? How do you figure out what it is you ought to do? And one of the situations a human being can be placed in that are really the most terrifying. What is the greatest jeopardy you can find yourself in? And how do you just sort of solve these problems? We evolved as hunter-gatherers in groups of 25, so we have these strong senses of sort of kinship attachment, fear of the other, us versus them, and yet, if you're in groups of 25, you've got a very obvious gene pool problem. So you have to find a way to, and not just, physical genes, but also ideas. You need to be able to refresh your ideas and to interact with other groups, but you have to find sort of ways to do that minimize the risk to yourself.
It's basically a female genre, though. Except for Monk Lewis. Most of the authors of books, Gothics, are women, and huge number of readers. I mean, I grew up in an era where I was reading, remember Victoria Holt? As well as Mary
I was
Stewart.
consciously thinking.
And what was Phyllis Whitney? Remember?
Yes.
Lord, she wrote books until she died. I mean, she was, I think, 99 or something, when she died.
That'll be me. I'll be punching over my laptop.
Or
whatever it is, you're going to probably be sort of brain transmission at that point. But.
Elizabeth Peters is in that tradition. And, way back, I've never really read one, but Mary Roberts Reinhardt wrote a huge number of, they weren't necessarily Gothic, but they were all based on, if only, how was that? What's her famous phrase? If only I'd. It was like, don't go into the attic,
Exactly.
But it was one of those kindly, if only I, if only I'd known was kind of the watchword there. So, but it's always been, a book that seems to strike chords with women, and maybe it relates to the fact that women have much less power, and so in reading these books where women won this sort of battle, towards whatever they were going towards. My brother, is it My Brother Michael? Is that the one in France? No, Nine Coaches Waiting. Where she's trapped in France, in the castle or whatever it is, and in the end has to make this really gutsy choice about, which one she's going to go with.
Well, that's exactly it.
I don't think that men have the same emotional reaction to,
to being on your own, because we don't have, on a bell curve basis here, we don't have the same physical strength. So for us, it's a much greater position of jeopardy to be on your own without somebody to, help protect you against, greater physical advantage. So it's an especially, it's an especially female conundrum in a way, because we are, we are, and certainly have been in our, evolutionary past, more physically vulnerable and very sensitive to walking on a street at night and knowing that, you know, we've got to somehow outwit somebody who might have
Well, it's
superior
not just
resources, right?
physically vulnerable, it's financially. You know, women didn't have access to money and power as easily. And
when
actually,
you're having
laws
children,
were very
can't
much against it. I mean, if you're a Victorian woman, you know, you couldn't keep your children. If you went to divorce or something, you gave up not just, you know, your husband, but you lost your children. Married women's property right it was a mid-19th century thing, so when you married, your husband owned you and everything you had. And that's why there were dower houses and dowry rights and so forth, so that women, when they were widowed, at least would have some ability to reclaim some of their money. And you know, other societies have been worse on that than we have. I mean, if you read about India and the position, you know, of brides that don't produce children or something, and their own mother-in-law barbecue them, you know, so that they can move on for, no, I'm serious, you know. So our culture in some ways is not nearly as barbaric as some others in regard to women who don't produce children or turn out to be bad wives or, you know, stray off the path or whatever it is, you know.
I think women have a strong, very visceral reaction to that situation of being left to your own devices, left to, you know, sink or swim by your own strength. And so I think we respond very strongly to books like this, where, you know, you have where the main character does go on this journey from vulnerability to strength.
And aside from all that, it's really fun, which is probably not the feeling we're giving you.
Exactly, no.
But it is. It's just a lot of fun to read the book, and you know, it is a beach book, despite all these things. Now we
I love to immerse the reader. You know, if you've read any of my books, you know, I love to immerse you in a particular world, so that, you know, using voice and atmosphere and setting to really make you feel as if you are living in this particular historical period. So I don't lecture, I don't deliver I give my historical lectures when I'm in my book talks, but I don't deliver them inside the book. Inside the book, it's supposed to just absorb into your pores and you, so that you feel as if you are existing in this historical period and in this very lush tropical setting, but also juxtaposed against, you know, the very stark setting of the First World War and the Western Front.
Right, and actually Cornwall has some parallels in England to Florida. I mean, it's down
Well, you have this smuggling
south, and it's got palm trees, and it's got a long coastline, and all the rest of it. So, I mean, you know, there's a, you know, there were women Cornish pirates. Do you know that? There are. So, you know, there's this sort of tradition.
It was a very deliberate choice of setting, those two settings.
Cornwall is a nice parallel. Now, Beatriz also writes as Juliana Gray. Do you know that?
I didn't.
You didn't know that.
I was at the
And
bookstore.
she
I thought, this sounds good.
It is. Now, a perilous undertaking, right? So we have good news. We have good news for you in that respect also.
Yes. Well, I have a new Juliana Gray book out. It's called A Strange Scottish Shore. And yes, and that will be out in September. And we have just handshaked on.
She's going to come with Charles Todd, and we're going to have tea on September 23rd with her Juliana Gray book and the Todd's new Bess Crawford book, which will be fun.
Yeah, I have a feeling my father-in-law will want to come along because he's a huge Charles Todd fan. So, I haven't even told him yet. He's going to be over the moon. He's going to be like, well, wait, how come you are allowed to be in the same room with, you know, so.
But as Juliana Gray, you have started this series that is, I'm trying to remember, is it mid or late Victorian?
It is actually Edwardian, technically.
Is it Edwardian?
It's 1906,
okay.
yes, which was where I wanted to set the original Juliana Grays, but they told me I couldn't. This was right before Downton Abbey. Because that was a period that didn't sell. So when I came back to them with a new contract, I'm like, okay, these are my demands, you know, and I want to go back to 1906. So this is kind of almost my historical geeky side. I really absorb into this very Edwardian voice. My father's British, and his father was, I mean, you know, he was born in 1900, and he'd had that voice that still rings in my head. So I take all of that stuff that I grew up with, and I just really plunge into it. So I am very excited about this book. It's gonna, so it goes to the far north of Scotland and the Orkney Islands, and it deals with Selkies and the Selkie Legends, because the new Juliana Gray books are really all about myth making and how we create these myths and how they get changed and distorted and reshaped as they get passed down through generations.
The first one's about Crete, right?
Yes, it's about, it ends up being about Theseus and Ariadne.
A fabulous story. Best book ever written about, no offense, absolutely best book ever written about that was Mary Renaud in a book called The Bull from the Sea and The King Must Die. Those two books, if you have never read them, I cannot recommend them to you highly enough, but they tell that whole Theseus and Ariadne story and the bull bait. But if you read them, and then if you read Beatrice's book, what happens in Beatrice's book will make more sense to you because you will know
Exactly.
what that culture was and who these characters were.
Barbara and I share a passion for opera, which I think is how we bond a lot of time. But of course, Richard Strauss had a wonderful opera about Ariadne. So I was on, I have Met Opera Radio on in my car constantly. It drives my kids crazy, but they were actually playing that not too long ago.
Ariadne of Naxos, right, which I saw in Santa Fe with the soprano. They absolutely weighed 400 pounds, so she weighed anything. and it was the most static opera in history because she literally couldn't move. They had to have somebody sort of like, and so all of the action had to revolve around her because she could take a step, which is, and now she had an incredible voice, but I don't know, I know it was the strangest.
And it's interesting because now I think the sopranos certainly are, they're more sort of singing actors now. They're really trying to, this was a delight for me. My husband, a very dear friend of his he's a rower, very dear friend of his from his rowing days, recently remarried. And his wife is Susanna Phillips, who's one of the wonderful rising sopranos at the Met. And she runs marathons. So, and she was a basketball player in high school and I think college. So, that's definitely not your granny's soprano, that's for sure. And she's amazing and she's a lovely person. So,
well, there's a reason for heft, and if you're going to sing Wagner, I always remember Helen Traubel, who
behind you.
was this incredible Wagnerian soprano, and somebody once described her. She was built like a perfect bellows. I mean, her whole physical shape, but I mean, it takes the incredible stamina and breath to sing Wagner. And
you got to sing over that orchestra is the problem, and all those horns.
Just sing Wagner. And so there's a reason why you have to be, sturdy to do that. But no, I just remember because Ariadne Strauss, he's a composer at the turn of the 20th century. Der Rosenkavalier is his most well-known opera.
Yes, which is what I based last year's book of Serenade on, was Der Rosenkavalier.
But there's a certain amount of action and so forth going on. So I'm going over to Santa Fe to the opera in a couple of weeks, and it'll be fun. One is Handel, and one is Lucia, which is 19th century Scottish melodrama, and one is about Steve Jobs. So it's a whole slice through,
things.
the whole.
Actually, Lucia, that's about the only mad scene I can stomach. I could go on this whole riff about opera mad scenes and how composers just don't understand women, so they just have them go mad in order to, resolve the situation. But Lucia's mad scene is about the only mad scene that I really, it's just so, because here's a woman, again, like, our Gothic heroes, who has no say. She's just got no say. And she finally takes matters into her own hands. And so it's about the only mad scene I can be bothered with, really. Otherwise, they sort of drive me crazy. But,
Mad scenes drive you crazy.
Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah. So, that's you for the moment. Any of you have questions that you'd like to ask?
We went a bit straight
about
here,
any of your
so we
books?
can steer it back to Cocoa Beach from...
Is Cocoa Beach a real place?
It is. People have asked me, did you do your research there? And of course the problem is that the actual Cocoa Beach circa 2017 is nothing like it was in the 1920s. It's right near Cape Canaveral.
Okay.
So during that whole growth in that, it had a huge boom town.
Dream of Jeannie, wasn't that
Oh,
that
was
that?
it? I didn't realize that. That I didn't know. Because I was focused on, Cocoa Beach in
Because
the
he was an
1920s.
astronaut.
So I did visit just to get kind of the lie of the land, but it's it's definitely not the way it was at all. It's very developed and very much more of a kind of a spring break type destination, I guess. What is it, the Wonton Surf Shop, which you get billboards for about 400 miles before you actually arrive at Cocoa Beach.
I can easily believe it. I wouldn't recognize Hilton Head if I went there today compared to the 70s, and I'm flabbergasted when I go to Hawaii. Honolulu.
I
What
grew up
happened?
in
Development there.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
I grew up in Florida.
Yes.
So you remember?
Sydney and Orlando, and I used to go to Cocoa Beach all the time.
Yes,
When I
it's
was a
very
teenager.
close to Orlando.
And
Yeah.
before it was even developed like it is today.
Yes.
And, down by Cape Canaveral and all up through that area was just beach.
Yeah.
Now it's condo.
All high rises and
Yeah.
condos.
So this
It's
book is
about
all
everywhere.
about when it was beach, and you actually had a lot of that rum running trade coming through.
Beautiful then.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yes. Yes. But it was certainly in the 20s. It was a boom town. That was when it had its first. They renamed the county. It used to be called Mosquito County. And then they realized that this is really not a good idea for development because who wants to move to Mosquito County? So
Fair enough.
exactly, they changed the name. So I did most of my research by going to, there's wonderful books now that, these sort of past and present books. If you really want to see what something looked like in the past, you've got these wonderful old photographs that you can look at and sort of match to the current map and figure out how it used to be. But
Old phone directories and things like that too can be helpful.
But it is, and it's wonderful if you're doing historical fiction set in Europe because you can go to a great many European cities and it looks very similar to. Even if it was bombed heavily, it was often rebuilt, according to the old street plans and things. So, it's a lot more fun to go and research a novel set in, say, Venice, than to go and going to, do your research in Cocoa Beach for a novel set in the 1920s is
It's a lost world.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're saying, basically. It's, yeah.
Growing up.
So,
Melbourne and Sebastian,
yes,
all down to that little coastline. It's just.
yes.
It's hard to remember that Florida a lot of it was just wilderness.
It
I mean,
is,
the middle
yes.
part of Florida was horse country and.
Oh, yeah, Ocala is.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Kissimmee, when they built Disney World, it was
Yes.
all swamp.
Yeah.
They had
Disney
built
World in
everything.
California was all orange groves.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. And now it's all paved over and it's all parking lots and McDonald's and cheap hotels, whatever. So, no, it's
My
good.
my mother grew up in Orange County back when it was Orange Groves, and Knott's Berry Farm was a berry farm. And
When I was a freshman at Stanford, we went down to see Stanford play UCLA. It was the year Disneyland opened, and you had to go forever, and the orange, groves were all, it was just beautiful. When I went back, like 40 years later, I just cried. I mean, I just could hardly believe. I know that's what happened in Florida.
exactly, it was air conditioning.
Yes,
It's
well,
what
that's
did
what
it.
happened in Phoenix in point
Yes,
of fact.
if you want a good laugh, and this was Lauren Willig, our
Yeah.
dear friend. So I have just, those of you who have read the book that I wrote in collaboration with Lauren Willig and our other friend, Karen White. So The Forgotten Room, that was out about a year and a half ago. And we just finished the next one, which is
Great.
set in the Lusitania. And we certainly hope to be back here in the fall of 2018 when we go on the road with that book. But Karen and Lauren and I have a wonderful relationship. You'll see when you go to our book talk, where we're sort of like a single brain and 3 different bodies. So we have a constant, 3-way text chat going. And today the topic was, I guess Lauren had found this wonderful little bit, if there had been air conditioning in Tennessee Williams. And so just Google that. I think it was in the NewYorker.com. It is the funniest thing because, they're very
no, I
short
can see
plays.
it, right.
If there's no heat, those plays are very, well, that's reasonable. Then let's talk about our issues instead of, stop.
Wow, that's a really.
No, go Google it. It's hilarious, absolutely hilarious. It's a good book.
Anybody have a question or a
I
comment?
know that's I'm outnumbered here, but
It's okay. We're
so
delighted you're here.
I heard about the book on Instagram.
Ah.
There's a book club that I follow.
Oh, the saltwater reads.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes, those people are terrific. Is there any more saltwater reads? readers here, oh, it's terrific. It's just, and Cocoa Beach is their very first
Yeah.
pick, so it's very
So that's
exciting.
where I found the book. I really love the cover, I'll be honest. Like, that was the first thing that got my attention.
Yes, it is. The colors, they really did a great
But
job.
as I was reading it, it's a page turner. I mean, I remember, because, so I work, after we got work at 4:30 in the morning,
Uh-huh.
and I would go to bed, and I would be like, okay, just one more chapter. And so then it was like 12 o'clock, and it's okay, you need to get this down. So,
I'm glad to hear that.
I think I finished it in 3 days,
Oh,
because I was
wow.
just, I was
Fantastic.
going through it.
Oh.
But every page, I mean, every chapter is just when you think that you have something figured out, it's like, you just throw something else at as a reader. To me, I was like, oh my gosh. I remember like reading the, almost the second to last chapter where we learn
Just
about.
careful with the spoilers.
Yeah, so we
Careful
learn.
with the spoilers.
And my wife was driving, and so when
That's a relief, because I'm glad to know you were driving.
so my wife was driving and I was reading, and I just remember closing the books because I was like, oh my gosh. He's like, cool, I think it is cool. So I mean, I just really love your book. This is my first book.
Thank you
that
so
I've
much.
read.
I'm so glad to hear that.
But I mean, I just love how she grows. Regina
Yes.
grows into like, she's very naive, as you
Uh-huh.
mentioned, and then, I mean, also we learn about what happened to her in,
Yes, in her past.
in the past. Yeah. So, but I just want. I mean, I'm just rambling here, but I think it's just an awesome book.
Oh,
I
thank
really
you
like
so
it.
much.
I mean, every
I'm so
page,
glad to hear that.
every chapter, it was just, I couldn't put it down. Like 3
Yeah.
days, and I was done, and I was like, and then the ending was just like, threw me out the window. I was like, oh my gosh, how did they, what?
Yeah.
So-
Well, you know,
It's exciting.
it's wonderful to hear, and you know, but that it's funny that ending though. I was really one of the challenges in writing this book was because I was trying to create this world that looked one way from this initial perspective, and then by the end of the book, you realize you were looking at it the wrong way, and this surprise at the end is actually something that I was basically trying to draw a portrait of this person, just line by line throughout the book, while you know, creating this world for the reader where you think things are happening in one direction, and so it was a challenging book for me to write. That's the first time I've really done it to that extent. But I really did want to create that sense of things going back and forth and not being certain, because again, that's really what the 20s was all about. And living through that period was whiplash. And so I wanted to recreate that in the book. And I'm just so glad that you enjoyed it.
I want to know more about your book club. What's it called?
Well, it's someone else's book club, but I'm part of it. It's called
Saltwater Reads.
Saltwater
yeah,
Reads,
it's at
yeah.
Saltwater Reads.
It's an Instagram.
On Instagram, yes.
Okay. but-
And it's nationwide. It's on
It is,
Instagram,
yeah.
so it's everywhere.
So
I've had Saltwater Reads
why
readers
is it,
in just
why
about
is it
every.
called Saltwater Reads?
Why is it called Saltwater
I think they based it off on another book. I can
Okay.
remember the author's name.
Reads? Okay.
But and I think because if I remember right, the bio,
Uh-huh.
it has to do with mostly beach, based on beach towns.
Okay.
So
So that would make sense, the connection to
yeah,
to
That's
Cocoa
where I
Beach.
heard
They're
it.
terrific, such enthusiastic readers, and this is the first book club
It
pick,
is.
so I'm very honored
Awesome.
to be that pick. So yes, I have just about every single book talk I've had a Saltwater Reads reader stop by, so it's been
That's
terrific.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's absolutely great. Great. Anybody else? have
Technology harnessed for good. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. Well, all right, since you're all
Any
looking
more
like you're
questions?
done.
I have one question.
Oh, good,
Yes.
excellent.
So I recently just moved and now have a actual commute to work. So Audible is my new best friend.
Yes.
I have read A Certain Age before,
Uh-huh.
but decided to do the audio version as well.
Uh-huh.
And I can say that the readers of that gave me a whole new perspective on that
Yes.
book when listening to it. Do you have any insights as to who gets to read into those
I do.
your books? Okay.
So they give me the little audition clips, but here's my confession. I hate to pick because they're all really good and they're all amazing, and how do I say, how do I pick one over the others? And so I usually leave it to my editor to actually decide. But with 100 Summers, which was the first one, because I think overseas they didn't actually let me audition any of them. So I listened, and I was very conscientious for The 100 Summers, which was my next book. And I actually picked the narrator because I thought she did the best job of capturing the male voice. She didn't just sort of pitch it low. She actually it's hard to explain, but just the inflection and everything. And when I said, I want you to make him sound like, oh God, see, I'm having a name blank because I'm on the spot. But on Moonlight Bay, Doris Day and
Gordon McRae.
Gordon McRae, thank you. Oh, who's my, by the way, vintage crush? Gordon McRae. Oh, he's a dreamboat.
Yes.
Yes,
He
he
was
was
curly,
curly
wasn't
in
he?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
And my husband says it's okay that I have a crush on him because he was also a Deerfield boy.
And
So
he's
went
dead.
to this, and he's dead, which helps too. Because of course he died, I think, of some kind of like throat cancer because they were all smoking to death. So Gordon McRae's voice in On Moonlight Bay, I said that's kind of what you need to channel. And she was like, oh, I love Moonlight Bay. So I was like, okay, I found the right woman to narrate here. But I do have a very, because I'm just kind of, I hate to pick and to reject. So I would make a terrible editor. So I leave it to my editor to do that picking for me. But she does do a great job, and the narrators all do a terrific job. So I think it really does, illuminate, because voice is so important to me. So I would love to sit down with the narrators of the book and say, does it help that I put so much effort into the voice when I'm creating the book, and hopefully that makes it easier for them to create the character vocally.
Audiobooks are wonderful. We can sell them now on our own website, audible.com or whatever it is that we have. Miles, what is it that our audiobooks are?
The audible.com.
It is audible.com? Have that right? Yeah. And I think it's rising, as a great experience for people, as you say, who are commuting or doing other things. It's a different form of storytelling. Really interesting. Well, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Let's give Beatriz a round of applause. And thank you for coming.
Also,
She's a brave woman to come to Phoenix in July.
I know. I'm not sure I was thinking, but it's always lovely to come here. It's a great store, and I just, it's just, you really, of all the independent booksellers, you really do such a tremendous job of reaching out to the community and just hand selling books that
we like.
That you
Wow,
like.
which is great. So September may be cooler. Just to point out to you that we have lovely treats over here, drinks and cookies and so forth that Mr. Charles brought in, so please help yourselves. Don't go away without them. And I'm going to ask Beatriz if she'll go over there to that little wooden table so you can visit with her and get your books signed.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you all.